So I've been able to travel and preach for the past 6 years, and without a doubt, the number one question that I get from students is this question: how do I hear God? And so before I answer that question, which I think is an extremely important question, there's a question before that I think is equally as important. And here's what it is: how do I talk to God? I think sometimes whenever we're talking about prayer and we're talking about talking to God, it can become this massive thing where we kind of get stressed out and we think, man, what if I say the wrong thing? Or what if I don't mean to say this? And we just screw everything up, right? And I just want to encourage you with a story. When my middle child, Austin, comes to me and she needs something, she does not come to me with these big fancy words. She doesn't come to me asking me for something in King James Version. Hello? It's not that, Father, I beseech thee, on behalf of thine grace, wilt thou bestow on me some dinner. You know, she doesn't do that. She comes to me, she's like, Dad, I'm so hungry. And I think it's the same thing whenever we talk to God, that at the end of the day, it's a son and a daughter talking to their dad. And so me personally, when I talk to God, I'm not a long prayer. I'm not a long talker. I come and I get to the point and I'm like, hey, Dad, listen, like, I'm struggling today. Or, hey, Dad, thank you so much for what you're doing in my life. And it's simple, because that's how kids talk to their father. And so before we can understand how to hear God, we got to understand how to talk to God. And it's just this ongoing relationship. I personally don't have a set time in the day where I'm praying for this many minutes or hours. That's just not how I operate. I think you've got to find what works best for you. But I'm constantly having a conversation with God and talking to Him about how I'm feeling, what's going on, what I'm thankful for. And so I think that's where hearing God actually starts with how you talk to God. So here's the second question: how do I hear from God? I think sometimes we can hear preachers and we can hear pastors and friends talk about hearing from God, and sometimes it's confusing because we think we're going to hear God like you're hearing me right now. And so I've just got 3 things, just real quick. What are 3 ways that we can hear from God? Number 1, the Bible, right? We understand and we hear God based on what He's already said. And so I always ask students this. They said, well, I'm not hearing from God. My question is always this: well, are you in His Word? Well, no. Well, how are you expecting to hear Him when you're not listening to what He's already said? Right? So digging into the Word. I know the Bible can be a confusing book. It can be a weird thing. Start in the Gospel. Start in the book of John and just read about Jesus. Read about how He talks to people. And the more I read about Him, the more I'm able to understand Him. So here's the second thing. I think God speaks through circumstances. God will use what's going on around you to speak something inside of you. And so I'm looking at my circumstances and I'm looking at life, and God was always using different circumstances to teach different lessons. So the disciples are in the middle of a storm and He's teaching on this. They're in the middle of a famine, He's teaching on this. What is He doing? He's using outside circumstances to communicate something inside of them. So number 1, the Bible. Number 2, your circumstances. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, I do believe God just speaks to us. God is so willing to speak to you if we're just willing to listen. Now here's the thing about listening and hearing God. It is impossible to listen to God if you're the one doing all the talking. If I'm just constantly talking to God and telling Him all these things about my life, there is no opportunity for Him to speak to me. And here's the thing, church. What God has to say about your circumstance is far more important than what you have to say about your circumstance. So this is just me, I'll pray, I'll get all of my stuff out of the way, and then I just take some time to sit and listen and say, God, okay, how are you going to talk to me? Now here's the kicker, and last thing. It is pointless to hear from God, watch this, if you don't obey and do what He says. What good is it to listen if you're not willing to obey? And so the number 1 quickest way I feel like for God to stop talking to you is for you to not be obedient in what He's already told you to do. So here's the thing, recap. The Bible, get into His Word, listen to what He said, and that's going to speak to you about what He's currently saying. Your circumstances, look all around you. Look at what God's teaching you with the circumstances around you. And here's the third thing, you've got to listen. Not just listen, but be willing to obey what He's saying to you.